Fairbanks Point is the point which lies about 2.5 miles east of the village, and is the last point you see jutting out in the lake. It bears the name of the first clergyman to come to the area. He was given 100 acres of land by the land company on the point to come and preach for 2 years. Following Fairbanks in 1812, Reverend Davenport Phelps came under the same program and was given 100 acres west of the Fairbanks tract. Phelps became an Episcopal clergyman following his release from his internment in Canada, having been captured during the Revolutionary War in the Boston area. Many of the Episcopal churches in western New York were formed under his direction. He died in 1813 and is buried in Lakeview Cemetery. The Burcroft home has been remodeled many times and is much different today than it was when it served as the customs house. It was at the foot of the old landing that was used as a wharf until the 1860s. That landing was large enough to drive a teaming wagon out on and turn around at the end and return to shore. This dock was used for many years to refuel the steam vessels with wood, and many a fugitive slave was sent to Canada and freedom from this wharf. The middle house, also a Burcroft home, was the site of the local barroom called the Pig's Ear. Being close to the base of the pier, it was easy access for sailors stopping in port to load and unload. The Russell Jack home has just been the scene of an extensive remodeling and restoration job and adds much to the beauty of Washington Street. The Captain John Palmer home looks much different from Washington Street than it does from Pig Lane. Early on it had a front stoop. Then in the 1890s a front porch was added. In the late 1930s it was removed, and the present frontispiece was designed and installed under the direction of the late Donald Farragher, a Rochester architect and summer resident of Pultneyville. The 1867 photo of the home looks much as it does today. Here we are at the doorstep of the Lucille Lockley residence, the former Mann home. Mrs. Mann was the postmistress for many years, and if you will notice the brass slot in the blue front door, you will see the old letter drop for the post office. The open space between the old Beardsley and the Mann home at one time was the site of the Pallister boot shop. The old Beardsley home has changed very little. We read in the old commercial press, the Pultneyville monthly paper, that Xenius Burnell, the owner in 1860, was in the process of remodeling this home. What you see now is the result of that restoration. A local doctor, Dr. Beardsley, lived here for many years. We think that Dr. D.C. Higgins originally built the home before 1820. The Washington Troop home, as near as can be determined, was built in 1828. He was the younger brother of Captain H.N. Troop. This home also had a front porch installed in the 1890s, and it was removed in the 1920s.
The home of Captain Horatio Nelson Troop was constructed in 1832 under the supervision of his brother, Washington Troop. This is one of the finest examples of cobblestone architecture in western New York. The cobblestones that the house was constructed with were picked up on the shoreline just west of the village here in Pultneyville.
While his home was being built, Captain Troop was in Cleveland, starting the Cleveland Forwarding Company. One of the mysterious features of this home is that there were witches' bottles built in the living room ceiling. He built ships here locally. One of his last was the Magic, his personal steam yacht, completed in the late 1860s. After his death in 1884, it was sold to a group in St. Vincent and used as an excursion boat on the St. Lawrence River until 1915. He was interested in wind power and built and patented wind machines. His greatest achievement was the developing of a screw propeller that worked efficiently as early as 1833. One of his early models shows a windmill on a deck of a ship operating a screw propeller. For many years he was involved in the Ontario Steamship Company. This placed him in a position to be an effective agent in the Underground Railroad, and he was responsible, like many others on the shore of Lake Ontario, for the transportation of the fugitive slaves to freedom. The old fire hall was built by Benton and Fish shortly after 1900. At that time, the first floor was a general store, and the second floor was used for the Knights of the Good Templars Lodge Hall, a temperance organization. The Robert Valore home was an early residence built of stone, but today covered with shake shingles. The Valore store was the site of mercantile activity from the beginning of the village, with a number of structures having been on this site. The last store on the site burned in the late 1960s and is now the site of the residence of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Hawthorne.
The old hotel that originally stood on this site was started back around 1809 by Russell Whipple. The original hotel was added to over the years, and it burned in 1887. The building we see here was constructed in 1888 and has changed very little since then, except a roof has been put over the second floor porch. The original hotel was used for many community activities. Up on the third floor there was a sprung floor which was used for a dance hall. And this was the scene of the sailors' farewell in the spring and the sailors' return in the fall. The Sailors' Monument here was erected in 1935 as a WPA project. Here on this plaque here we have the names of the various vessels, and we have the name of the captain and the year here in which the vessel was commissioned. If you notice the stones, they're a bit different here. The stones that the monument was constructed with come from over on the Stony Lonesome Road. And over in that area, the forest was all burned off in order to clean up the fields. And in so doing, there was enough humus so that the fire was quite warm, and it cracked all the stones. So you have all these flat edges on all these stones. The plaque here on this side of the monument commemorates the War of 1812. Originally, this was on a huge boulder at the end of J Street. This boulder sat on a concrete base, but it was washed in the lake during the period of high water back in 1943. It was removed from the boulder and then taken up here and placed on this monument.
In May 1814, the British were observing the coastal towns along the south shore of Lake Ontario. After stopping at the mouth of the Genesee, they worked their way east, stopping at Ontario and taking 2 men on board to show the way to Pultneyville. Sunday morning, May 15, 1814, as the militia, under the direction of General Swift, were on maneuvers at the intersection of J and Washington Street in a dense fog, the fog lifted and the British fleet came into view lying off the port. Contact was made, and the citizens were assured safety and the sparing of property in exchange for the stores in the public warehouse. The agreement was honored until a British seaman stepped out of line and was shot by a fellow seaman. This commotion caused a volley of shots to be exchanged. The British retreated to their vessels. Then they began shelling the village. But for some unknown reason, they suddenly stopped shelling and headed down the lake. During this encounter, the only casualty was the British seaman. 2 of the settlers were taken prisoner and were transported to Halifax, being returned shortly after some negotiations were made.
The beach house here, as this is often referred to, the house on the monument, sits right on the public right-of-way here. This park here is the extension of Mill Street. For many years, this was the home of the local cobbler, Mr. Isaac Fisher. Later, his son lived in this house. It was Dr. Fisher, and he was noted for the book of poems that he wrote. It says Niagara and Other Poems was the title of the book.